Today is our fourth sign. I dubbed it power over time, and I will explain more how Jesus has power over time when he healed the lame man. Better say, kind of our English dictionary, it's better saying the disabled man, because he wasn't a loser. He was disabled. Lame, get it? Stay with me. But I came across this illustration about some weird laws that are still in the books in the United States. And the first one made me laugh because at Dollar Tree, one of my jobs is I plan the orders for we used to call it our Chicago distribution center, but 8-9 years ago, they moved to Joliet, Illinois. And so I had to learn how to say Juliet, and that's how you say it. They actually have a law on the books that it is illegal to mispronounce that name. I read that and laughed and went, I know how to pronounce it, Juliet. But in Utah, there's also a law that says they have to have sunlight between two people dancing. It's a law. In San Francisco, you are not permitted to carry a basket suspended on a pole. In old Hollywood, California, it is illegal to drive more than 2,000 sheep down Hollywood Boulevard. You laugh, but it's still on the books. Kansas City, children are forbidden to buy cap guns, cap pistols, but they're not prohibited from buying shotguns. Okay. And the last one, we go back to Juliet. It's illegal. Ladies, don't throw anything at me. But it's illegal for ladies to try on more than 6 dresses in one store. See, we all laugh at these. These are absurd, right? It's like, what in the world were these yahoos thinking? But we have to think about when they were made and instituted, these laws were needed. They're silly to us now, but we're going to talk about something like that. But for us parents, we kind of understand. Because, see, we have rules in our houses, don't we, parents? We can't really be vague. We can't say, hey, Johnny, hey, Mary, come home at a decent hour. What's the definition of decent? 9 p.m., midnight, 3 a.m., the next morning? See, we can't have broad terms. We have to be specific or the kids would run amok. And as soon as I say that, I have Animaniacs in my head going amok, amok, amok. But we as parents have learned that we have to be very specific. But outside the family, our rules may seem silly to other people. But there's reasons for it. We're going to talk about today a rule, a law that may be silly to us today because we're 21st century American Christians. And remember, for those who are new, I'm all about hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is a $25 word meaning the science of interpreting Scripture. And we can't breathe into our current culture into what we read in the Bible. Because the Bible's culture is the Middle East, Asian, Oriental mindset, and it's 2,000 to 3,000 years removed from our current culture. But the law that we're going to talk about is the Sabbath. See, I'm not going to be an apologist for the Pharisees or the legalistic Jews at the time because some of the rules that they push, we can't understand it. Remember I said in the past, these yahoos have taken the 10 Commandments and morphed it into 650 additional rules and laws based on the 10 Commandments. And again, not to bash the Pharisees too much, Pharisees started out, like most things, good. There's a group of men, when God restored Israel to a city-state, not really a country, but a city-state, and these guys did not want to be on the religious roller coaster. Throughout the Old Testament, they did good, they did bad, they did good, they did bad, and these men said, we're going to make sure we no longer turn our back on God. So they established this to help people to stay right with God. But it got to the point where everything that they created became equal to what God gave. See, man is not equal to God. God is here, we're here. So that's where we are. And all this is not in my notes, it's free of charge. But John chapter 5 is a turning point for the ministry of Jesus Christ. See, Jesus is about to break the unbreakable law in the eyes of these Pharisees, in the Jewish leadership, the Sabbath. As soon as I say the Sabbath, Belt, the character from the Groots, it popped in my head and went, dun, dun, dun. Because it's almost as if the old Transylvania 6,000 movie in the 1980s, whenever someone said something weird, there's thunder or lightning. It's a classic comedy. But whenever someone says a word, thunder, and it's ominous. But that's what people want you to think. That's what the Jewish leadership wanted you to think. Sabbath is dangerous to break. You must hold it. And this guy, Jesus, is about to destroy what we hold sacred. See, John chapter 5 is another sign. It's our fourth sign. We saw in John chapter 2, the turning the water into wine. Jesus used that to draw his disciples to himself. See, we are learning, some of you are amazed what we've learned the last 3 times, is that Jesus is not all about the micro, he's about the macro. He's not about the big, he's about the little. When Jesus turned the water into wine, only 5 people knew what he did. He only had 3 disciples at the time, and he had his mom, and he had the servants. So maybe 5 to 10 people knew that first, but it was only the disciples that we saw believed that he is the Messiah. The second one was the cleaning of the temple in Jerusalem. He showed his passion for his Father's house, and later in that same chapter, he did other signs, and few people believed in him. Those signs did enough for a religious leader named Nicodemus to invite him to his house in chapter 3 to ask him questions. That's how we got the most powerful passage in the Bible, John 3:16. And then the Samaritans came to know him as Messiah. He didn't do a sign for them, but they believed his words. And then last time we met, in John chapter 4, a royal official believed because he healed his son. Not only him, but his whole household. And that royal official was a what? Gentile. He was not a Jew. He was a Gentile. So that was the first foray into reaching out to the Gentiles by Jesus Christ. See, in John chapter 5, Jesus' miracles create opposition. This sign, his miracle he did, created conflict between he and the religious leaders. From John chapter 5 toward the end of the chapter, end of the book, every chapter, the persecution intensifies. Jesus goes out of his way to poke the bear. He goes up and he becomes one of the 3 stooges and pokes the religious leaders right in the eyes, almost every chance he gets. Because his job, John's job, is to show Jesus to be deity in the flesh. And that's something that the religious leaders could not stand. As we read our key passage, we will see why Jesus is so threatening. And looking at our miracle, we will examine how this affects. Before we do, like we always do, we're going to set the scene. I call it setting the table for our meal. And to set our meal, we're going to look at the first 4 verses of John 5. The words are behind me. It says, after this, there was a Jewish feast. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic. That is 5 covered walkways. In these, a great number of sick, blind, lame, paralyzed people were lying, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel of the Lord went down and stirred up the water at certain times. Whoever first stepped in after the stirring of the water was healed from whatever disease which he suffered. John opens up chapter 4 with this phrase, after this. Some translations say after these things. That is telling us we need to look at previous chapters. So not only are we going to look We have to look back at what Jesus did in John chapter 4 when he healed the royal official's son, but also chapter 2 when he changed the water into wine and he cleansed the temple. So it tells us that we need to, whatever John's about to share in this chapter is going to be a continuation of what he did before. We know that in our passage it says a feast of the Jews. Some transcripts say the feast of the Jews. Most scholars, remember scholars are one of us, but they have an alphabet behind their name, PhD, MDiv, ABC 1, 2, 3, believe that this is probably the Passover because the Passover is the most prominent, most important celebration that the Jews have. Remember when we talked about the cleansing of the temple? It's Christmas, July 4th, Thanksgiving, all wrapped up in one package for the Jew. So they went and they are about to do the Passover. Some of you might be scratching your head and went, Tom, we just saw a Passover in 2 chapters before. John only covers 18 months of Jesus' 3.5-year earthly ministry. We can speculate from John at the end of chapter 4 to the beginning of chapter 5, there's about 10 to 12 months we fast forwarded. See, John is very selective. His vantage point of Jesus is God in the flesh or the eagle face in Ezekiel 1. So he doesn't care what happened the whole year between last Passover to this Passover because he's about showing Jesus as God in the flesh. Now, the big question we have here is that what is that pool all about? The pool at Bethesda. We read about it all the time, right? The pool at Bethesda. What is that pool all about? It is used to wash stinky, smelly, dirty sheep. See, that's why it's right at the sheep gate. See, on the other side of the wall is a big field where they would raise the sheep that they were used for Passover sacrifice. So sheep are dirty, smelly animals. So in order for them to be sold at the temple, like we saw before, they need to be washed. Now, when I was young, remember I shared with you guys that I was raised in church. When I was a kid, I first read about this. I'm thinking, why doesn't this guy just sit on the lip and roll over to the pool? Going to Bible college, now I'm learned. This pool is about 200 to 300 feet, 100 feet under the ground. And how it used to be they had a bridge that went over it, they had roof, and it was a stair walkway, maybe 2 to 3 feet wide. So what the shepherds did, they would walk the sheep down, dip them into the water, walk them back out. It was like a conveyor system. So that pool is not a very clean pool. This is Passover. So most likely it stinks of what sheep smell like and what sheep have on their wool when they go into the water. But all these sick people are waiting. What are they waiting for? They're waiting on a fable. See, the stirring of the water is a fable. It is folklore. There's no recorded evidence that anyone has ever been healed by going into the water. But when you're sick, you hold on to something even though it's myth. And some of you theologians out there might have caught that verse 4 had brackets. And some of you that have your own Bible might be going, that's not in my passage. That's not in my book. See, the reason why it's a bracket, verse 4 is not in the newer translations. And if it is, it has a little note. See, most scholars believe verse 4 was not on the original transcript. They believe that it was probably a doodle or a note on the margins that someone wrote, and over the centuries, it got migrated into the text. Maybe someone just wrote it and went, that's the reason why all these sick people were at this pool. But it doesn't affect the meaning of the scripture. It just gives us an idea why all the disabled people were migrating around this pool and why this pool was so important to the people. Remember, the pool was designed to wash stinky smelling sheep. It wasn't there to heal people, but that's where the people were. Now that the scene is set, now that we have the table ready, let's dive in. As before, we will look at the event, the significance, and the application of the fourth sign, the healing of the disabled man. I actually have lame man, but remember, he's not a loser, he's disabled. So the event, let's pick up on verse 5, and we're going to read to the end of 18. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. Dun, dun, dun. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to take up your bed." I want to pause right here. It's amazing to me. It actually hit me this morning when I was reading through my notes that these same Jewish leaders who would camp out, I wonder if they said anything that morning to those who were carrying these disabled people to the pool. These people did not sleep at the pool. They did not live at the pool. They lived in Jerusalem. So every day, either they or their loved ones would carry them to the pool and let them either get money as they beg or hope that was the day that the angel was going to put his big toe in the water and stir it up. But these same yahoos who told the guy, "Why are you carrying your bed?" probably watched this same gentleman being carried to the pool by his loved ones earlier that morning. Just a thought that hit me. Let's move on. Where were we? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Excuse me real quick. I enjoyed singing too much this morning. First, we're going to look at Jesus' knowledge. We see in verse 4, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he was already been there a long time. Jesus had knowledge of this man. And in my studying of this passage, some scholars have debated over the centuries that Jesus may have overheard about the guy, maybe heard his story. But in reality, the Greek wording of this is basically foreknowledge. Jesus foreknew of this guy. Remember, who was Jesus? God in the flesh. What is one of the attributes of God? All-knowing. So Jesus didn't stumble upon this area. He wasn't there on vacation like we do at Busch Gardens or King's Dominion or one of the other amusement parks, enjoying themselves, enjoying the scenes. All of a sudden you stumble upon this area and went, "Oh, how did I get here?" He foreknew the guy was going to be there at that day, at that time. And he knew for 38 years. We don't know how old this guy is. We don't know if he's 58, so he was 20 before he became disabled, or he could have been 40, or maybe he was born that way. We don't know. We just know that for 38 years, he laid there hoping against hope to be healed of whatever ailment he suffered. But Jesus knew the situation. The second we see is Jesus' compassion. I've told you this, and it's my favorite part of reading the gospel, is when Jesus interacts with us sinners, the compassion that he shows us, the compassion that he showed the sinners in the gospel. See, Jesus chose to go to the pool. He woke up that day. He brushed his teeth, brushed his hair. He put on his tunic. He put on the sash that most of the people paint him with it. And it's a sash that says, Jesus, God in the flesh. No, just joking. But he put his sandals on. He ate his breakfast. And he was probably finishing his breakfast and went, okay, you guys ready? And the disciples are going, where are we going? This is celebration time. Where are we going? Where are we going? So he said, we're going. He knew what he was doing. He knew where he was going. Just as he knew about the woman at the well was going to be there when it was too hot to be at the well, he knew that a woman was going to be at the well in Samaria. Just like he knew that it was time to go back to Galilee just in time to meet a royal official who had a sick son. He foreknew these people. See, Jesus moves toward the need. Not toward comfort. He embraces the brokenhearted, not the self-righteous. Notice in verse 4, Jesus asked the question, verse 6, Jesus asked the question, do you want to be healed? Okay, this is where I say what? Let's put flesh and blood on these people. They're not characters. They're not bigger than life. They are people like you and I. Put yourself in the skin of this disabled man. It's been 38 years. You're suffering from whatever ailment. You probably haven't felt your toes move in 38 years. And if someone, a rabbi, say, do you want to be healed? What would your answer be? Yes. He never said yes. The man, what he does is he tells his life story. And that's where we go, TMI. TMI, I really don't care about your life story, but do you want to be healed? But he said this in verse 8, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me. See, that's his reply. He's desperate. This guy is desperate to be healed, to get over it. He doesn't have anyone. Maybe his brother-in-law, who's married to his sister, who's fed up with taking care of him, probably drug him down. He's going to work. No, it's a Sabbath, so he's not working. He drug him down so he can go to the synagogue, get him out of the house for the day because he's tired of his groaning. He says, no one's here to help me. And then we see Jesus' compassion. That's the compassion is the reason for the healing. There was anything religious in the guy. There's nothing about faithfulness in the man. It's because Jesus' compassion is the reason why he healed. Third, we see Jesus' power. Verse 9, and at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Notice the word, at once. That shows Jesus' power. At the voice of God, at the voice of Jesus, diseased muscles and bones obey. John is showing the sovereign power of Jesus that day, just as he showed it in verse 4. Remember, when Jesus healed the royal official's son, he was 20 miles away from the boy. And Jesus says, go home, your son is healed. And remember, he said about 1 p.m. that day. So when the royal official went home and his servant said, oh, it was about 1 o'clock yesterday that your son got better. At once. That's the power of Jesus in this situation. Verse 9, we're told the day it happened. What day was it? Right. Dun, dun, dun. Does that mean anything? Or is this are we going to go from the power of God in the situation or a debate on the importance of keeping the Sabbath? Are we going to go from highlighting Jesus' passion and love for people, or are we going to talk about him dueling with the Jewish leaders? What is this all about? The answer is no. The Sabbath issue is risen. It is raised, but it is raised in a way that keeps the focus on the glory of Jesus. See, John says, in the fires of conflict, Jesus' glory is made to shine. Remember, Proverbs, as iron rubs against iron, they sharpen one another. Conflict is okay. Some of us don't like drama, conflict. We try to hide from it. Jesus ran toward the conflict. Because, see, if we disagree with one another in love, you are sharpening one another. I remember when Teresa bought the house we lived in, Sheila was there almost a year before we married. And she had been one of those prefab houses. Her house was like the third house built. So I saw just how quick those houses came up. But they always planted a bush and 2 trees. And both trees were killed from some disease. So being a 20-something-year-old guy, I went to the Lowe's and got an axe. Now, I was manly. I still have the axe, actually. So that first tree, I hacked it down. Excuse me, goodness gracious. I hacked it down, and then I got my shovel that I broke, digging at the root, dragging it out. Felt very manly. Oof. Second tree the next year died, and I was halfway chopping it down. I'm going, it's not chopping, because the blade became dull from the chopping of the other tree the year before. So I went back to Lowe's and got a file and used a file, which is iron, rubbed that iron against the iron of the axe head, and it sharpened it. So I was able to cut the other one. And I did not break that second shovel because it was actually not wooden handle. It was fiberglass, so it was more durable. But just as the axe got dull, it needed to be a file to sharpen it. Conflict actually is a good thing in our lives. It sharpens us. So the conflict of the Sabbath being raised is a good thing in the ministry of Jesus Christ. See, the conflict rose when the guy was carrying his bed. You almost visualize for me the surfer carrying his surfboard. He's carrying it. And when we think bed, it's basically just plywood with maybe a sheet or a comforter. He's just carrying it. And some guy, hey, you, the guy carrying your bed, don't you know it's illegal to do what you're doing? Who gave you the right to do that? That's what these guys are doing. We pick it up in verse 10. So the Jews, the religious police, said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to take up your bed. This guy's probably thinking, aren't you one of the guys that were standing there this morning when my brother-in-law carried me to the pool? But anyway, I digress. But he answered them, the man who healed me. Like I said, put yourself in your place. The religious police pulls you over for doing something you're not supposed to do. And what does this guy do? Not my fault. Not my fault. It's the guy who healed me's fault, not my fault. The man who healed me, the man said, take up your bed and walk. He told me to do it. And they said to him, who is the man who said to take up your bed and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, and there was a crowd in that place. Notice something here. Jesus healed the man and then disappeared. That leads us to ask, was this a drive-by healing, a random act? Or is Jesus going to leave him as is? Leave him dazed and confused, going, what just happened to me? No. Because we see in verse 14 that Jesus found the man. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple. So most likely the guy was going from the pool, carrying his bed, glorifying God, or going to the temple because, it's Passover. This is probably the first Passover he could go to the temple in 38 years. So he went to the temple where Jesus found him and said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. Jesus had no intentions in walking away from this man and leaving him just healed bodily. To see the significance, our second point of this healing, it's interwoven into the event and to the aftermath. Verse 6, we saw that Jesus knew the man. He foreknew about the guy. He knew how this man became disabled. He knew that he would be at the pool. He knew his whole life story even before he even met the guy. See, that is who Jesus is. The God who knows you and me perfectly. He knows everything about us, inside and out, and he still has compassion for us. Psalm 139, 2 through 4 says this, "You discern my thoughts from afar. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether." That's Jesus. Jesus is God. He knows us. And healing of the man is based on Jesus' compassion for the man, not on the man's faith or lack thereof. I came across this story about that Tony Caparelli told about a New York City pastor. In the 1990s, there was a gentleman that passed away, and not one New York pastor wanted to do the funeral because the man died of AIDS. He was a homosexual man. He died of AIDS. So one man came up and said, "I will do the funeral." So he did the normal funeral, went to the graveyard, and then did the graveyard setting. And there was about 30 other homosexual men at the gravesite. So when he concluded, he dismissed everybody. Not one man moved. And then he said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" And one of the men went, "Isn't there usually Psalm 23 read here?" So the pastor opened up Psalms and he read Psalm 23. Said, and then another man went, is there somewhere in the Bible that nothing will remove us from God's grace? So the pastor flipped to Romans chapter 8 and read Romans chapter 8. And for an hour, he basically took requests from these gentlemen who were hungry for God's word, because they wanted to have, he showed compassion for these 30 men who really were pariah for a lot of people, even to the non-religious. Some of us have lived it. We have Max. Don't judge me, you don't know me. And one of the things that we love as a family is history. Reading history, visiting places of history. So we have stumbled upon the CNN, again, don't judge me, documentary on the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 90s, and so on. And Ripley has really enjoyed watching them. And I've lived through the 70s, 80s, 90s, the 2000s, and she's in the middle of the 2010s now. And in the 1990s, they talked about the AIDS situation. And I remember the horror and the awe of Diana from Britain hugging on these people in a British hospital, because there was so much not known about it. So she was hugging on these people, and people were like, oh my goodness, oh. And others, even in Christendom, Christendom and Christianity are separate. Christendom is religious-based. Christianity is Jesus-based, a relationship with Jesus through the shed blood on the cross. Is that they were like, oh, that's God's judgment on those people. It's always those people. Whenever you get into that mindset, you're legalistic and you need to build a bridge and get over yourself. Because passages like what we just read is that Jesus went out of his way and went to a smelly part of Jerusalem full of diseased people and loved on one. It's not on my notes. This is free of charge. If you don't like it, you heard it today. We are called to show compassion. Our job is not to judge. I go back to 1 Peter 3:15, that we are to show the hope that is within us with love and respect. People, when they hear about us, do the block. Oh, you're a Christian. Not interested. But after you have a relationship with them and they find out, hey, you're just as broken as we are, but there's something different about you. That's when you go, the only difference between you and I is a man called Jesus Christ. The reason why Jesus walked away after he healed the man is that they would have been miracle seeking going on. Remember, we've been talking about the difference between miracle seekers and word seekers. See, not only were there hundreds of sick people, there were hundreds of people who were caring for them. So if Jesus stayed, you would have had hundreds of people going, oh, touch me, touch me, touch me, pick me, pick me. Jesus is not about, remember, the big. He's about the little. During his first time here, the first coming of Jesus, he was giving us foretastes of what the kingdom of God is. He was giving us foretastes. Foretaste is basically, remember guys and ladies, when you're doing your wedding and you wanted to say, what type of cake do we want? You meet with the cake maker and they give you little slivers of cakes and you taste the chocolate, and you taste the vanilla, and ooh, I like vanilla better. He said, oh, I don't like the whipped, I want the more calorie buttercream deluxe. And basically that's what Jesus was doing his first time here. He was giving us a foretaste of his power and that he was healing. Remember, the reason why he healed this man wasn't about the healing of the body. The reason why he healed this man, it was about bringing him to holiness. We see this in verse 14. Remember, I'm a professional amateur. Don't try this at home. It says this, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Yeah, I'm healed. Thank you. He said, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. See, that last part here, that nothing worse may happen to you, makes me think the reason why he's disabled is something that he did before he got hurt. Maybe he was up to something as a teenage kid that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And like most of us were at teenagers, and we're astonished that we're still alive today because of all the bad choices we've done. But maybe, just maybe, he did something that he wasn't supposed to do and he got hurt because of it. And that shows Jesus' foreknowledge of the man. And went, just remember what you were before you were crippled. Don't do that again so it won't be worse for you. But the reason wasn't for his health. Jesus healed him to make him holy. Jesus said, sin no more, stop sinning. My aim to healing you was to make you holy. Not whole, but holy. There's a difference. Remember, I've said this ad nauseum, almost the whole 7.5, almost 8 months I've been with you. God does not want us happy. He wants us holy. Holy is set apart. Holy is that we don't buy into the lie of Satan. Happiness is basically what's happening around you at the time. So if you're happy playing in the muck and mire, he's going to leave you there. But he's called us to something so much better. I tell people all the time at work, I've been at Dollar Tree for almost 25 years now. When the younger kids, some of them are actually young enough to be my children, which makes me feel old, but I am 54. That sometimes the grass that looks greener on the other side is astroturf. It's fake. It's green, but it's not real. So Satan is like, hey, why don't you come over here and enjoy all this greenery? And it's beautiful. And sin is fine for a season. And then it produces death. Either death of innocence, death of trust, or death physically, or more importantly, death of the spirit. But Jesus saying, I healed you that you will be holy. In other words, I healed you not to be self-righteous. I healed you to be holy. And here's the caveat. This is the interesting thing here. We read all 18 passages, right? The last handful of passages were Jesus doing the dukes it up with the Jewish leaders. There's nowhere in our passage that this guy ever got saved. This miracle never produced salvation in that man based on our passage. See, John is telling that because of what happened, he did that to get the attention of the Jewish leaders. He purposely poked the eye of the Jewish leaders because what happened is that after that conversation in the temple, the guy finds the Jewish leaders who were yelling at him, went, "Oh, I found out who healed me. He's Jesus." And they went, "Oh, we know that guy." Because remember, it's been a year since the last Passover, and he's been going around Galilee and Judea doing his work, and he's been doing verbal fisticuffs with these people. But it is intensifying the persecution. So they find Jesus and went, "Oh, we know what you did." And whenever someone tells me that, I go, "Could you be more specific for me, please? There's a lot I do wrong." It said, "We know what you did." And the passage tells us that this is the beginning of his persecution. Basically, the persecution of them questioning him, challenging him, heckling him, making it more difficult, trying to discredit him in front of people. Remember the other passages when he's telling parables and there's someone, how a rabbi would teach, they would do Q&A, question answer time, and they would throw in a ringer and try to get them the zinger, giving them hard answer questions, and being God, he's able to answer them. Able either answer them or just blowing them off and walking away. But this is the beginning. But we conclude in verse 18 that this is when they want to kill him. This is when they go, "We need to kill this guy because he is not keeping the Sabbath." See, John is not any different than the other Gospels. Throughout all the Gospels, there's the issue of the Passover is risen. That's why the Jewish leaders want Jesus out of the way, because he's not keeping the Sabbath. See, the difference between our narrative in John and the other Gospels is how Jesus approaches the discussion, the debate. See, he is accused in all other Gospels in violating of the Sabbath, but here his discussion is unique. And the reason why it's unique is that he's pushing back on why he's breaking the Sabbath. See, the Sabbath is the fourth commandment. And the historical basis of the Sabbath is what God did in creation. We see that in the Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath. This is Moses writing and talking. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it," or made it holy, separated it. The Sabbath is one of the Mosaic signs of the covenant. And really, it was illegal to do anything on the Sabbath. And legally, they could kill anyone that broke the law based on the Hebrew law. However, they're no longer under the Hebrew law, they were under Roman law. That means these jokers could not kill Jesus even if they wanted to without getting in trouble with the Roman government. That's the only reason why Jesus kept doing his thing for another 2 years, because they had to get their ducks in a row. They had to get the evidence to bring it to Pontius Pilate to do what happens at the end of John. So the reason why this discussion is different is that John 5, Jesus changes the narrative. See, the reason why you're not supposed to do the Sabbath is because God rested on the Sabbath, right? So we have to imitate what God did. Jesus is saying, you guys imitate God. I'm imitating my Father. There's a different relationship there. See, God is Lord. He is King, right? Kings are up here, right? And we're little peons down here. But when your Father, see the difference? God, King, Father relationship. So Jesus did not say in his interaction with them, our Father is working until now and I am working. This is what Jesus says. My Father is working until now and I too am working. The inference is him making himself equal to the Heavenly Father. You can almost hear the conniption fit in these guys' faces. Veins popping out of their forehead and their necks. They're turning red. Some of us are probably ripping their shirts, throwing dust in the ground, going, ah! And if it was up to them, they'd probably start throwing things at him. But the significance of the healing of the disabled man is showing that Jesus has the power not just to heal, but has power over time. And the reason why there's a difference is that Jesus basically rewound time and reset the disabled man to his peak health. To whatever he did before that caused him to be crippled, Jesus rewound the clock and made him perfectly whole physically. It wasn't about, remember I said this man never confessed Jesus to be Lord. He never converted and saw Jesus as Messiah. But remember, John writes these signs for reasons. I believe this passage is here because this sign created a stumbling block for the Jewish leaders. But it also recorded something that the readers generations later would read and see Jesus as deity. We see him as God of the Sabbath in that he has power to work in any day of the week, be it be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So stepping back, what is the main reason for this event? Remember, I always say that we can go in great detail. As a Bible student myself, I love getting into the nitty-gritty, but if it doesn't help us live our day in, day out, why are we even talking about it? How do we apply this into our life? What is John showing us? What can we take about one man being healed on the Sabbath? Remember, Jesus walked into a large crowd of sick people. He chose one man. He could have gone do the Jedi thing and everyone be healed like that. He didn't do that. He chose one man to heal him. And when he finds this man in a more secretive area, a more secluded area, when it's just he and him, he told him, sin no more. I know that our Wednesday night Bible group went and saw Unsung on Wednesday. And because I get up at dark 30 in the morning, I needed my beauty sleep, so I didn't make it. But when I wrote this Sin No More, the 1990s Rebecca St. John song, Sin No More, pops in my head because the movie's about her background. But basically, he tells them to sin no more. See, the first coming of Jesus, I told you, is about snippets. We're getting glimpses of who Jesus is in the gospel. It won't be until Revelation when we see Jesus in all his glory. I just finished in my personal Bible study reading Revelation. I am not a spooky Christian. I know my dad just turned 80 in December. And like most seasoned individuals, he really is getting into the end time studying. And some of you are getting there because we think we see the writing on the wall. let me caution you, we've been seeing the writing on the wall since AD 100. And someone told me, do you believe that we're in the last times? I said, yes, we've been living in the last times since Jesus went to heaven. So let's slow your roll a little bit. But when I read Revelation, as a Christian, I get excited. I remember as a teenager, people were like, ooh, Revelation, ooh. When I was going through my study in the late 90s of what worship is, I started reading Revelation afterwards and went, Revelation is nothing but preparing us for heaven. I saw worship everywhere reading Revelation. And then when you get to the last chapter, and when the New Jerusalem is revealed and it ends, that's when we see Jesus for who he is in all his glory. See, in our passage, we get little glimpses. We're able to see little bits here and there. See, the reason is that Jesus healed this man is not to make him physically whole, is to make him holy, set apart, that he can have a real life. That's the main point. You see, we are in the age of groaning. Is that things happen, good, bad, or indifferent. And that's where I always get not bent out of shape. I kind of roll my eyes when people ask, why did God allow this earthquake to happen? Why did God allow this forest fire to happen? Why this? Why? God is just a big meanie weenie. It's not fair. That's what people say. But then we go to Romans 8:23. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, are the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. This tells us that the earth was affected by sin. When Adam and Eve ate that tomato, remember tomatoes are fruit, or an apple or a pear, whatever you want to, a kiwi, whatever you want to say, they ate a fruit. The earth was affected. So the earth is decaying. The earth is dying. So when an earthquake happens, the earth is groaning. Our bodies are groaning. You are born to die. We don't like to think about that at all. We think we have 90 years. My uncle just passed away this past week at 92 years old. My mom is 78. She had aunts, since we're in Virginia, they're aunts in Kentucky. Aunts that lived to be 100 and 105. I went, that's kind of cool. But we're not promised the next 5 seconds. And I know people get bent out of shape when I say this, but that's okay. You can forgive me later. Is that people do not pass away early. People pass away at the appointed time. We all have expiration dates. So when God says it's your time, it's your time. On Friday, it's Green Lakes Baptist Church is the building that Ripley School uses pass. And they have an interim pastor that's a real nice guy. I met him a couple of times before. He was actually a Grammy award-winning Christian artist, and he was their piano player for years. The last time I preached for the church was his retirement from playing. But their last pastor died unexpectedly, so some of the members called him up and went, will you be our pastor for a while? And God has used him to invite the school in, but he's also using the building, and he's taken 15, 20 people, he built it up to 75. And he basically poking the old guard in the eye anytime he gets, going, do you want to be here in 30 years, or you want me to love you into the grave? And it rose from there. And he and I were talking Friday, and he was talking about how we should live our life with no regrets. We should live, when you breathe your last, there should be nothing left behind. And that's how we should live our life. Sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I always say, thank you, Lord, for this day. Let me use it for your glory, even if it's my last. And then there's a great theologian, philosopher, Tim McGraw, who wrote a song, Live Like You're Dying. And it was a song based on his father, when his father was dying. I'm not sure about you, but I see myself in this man in our passage. You might be thinking, how do you see yourself? Well, at one time I was blind. At one time I was deaf. And Jesus gave me eyes to see, and he gave me ears to hear my need for him. He found me lying in the bed of my own creation, my sin and shame, gave me his hand and drew me out of the muck and mire, and gave me the eyes I needed to see and ears I needed to see. And he made me holy because I accepted what he did on the cross. If you call yourself Christian here, you experience the same thing. You are healed. You are made holy. See, John begins in chapter 5 with Jesus in Jerusalem and on the Passover. And this is, they say John chapter 5 is a turning point for Jesus' earthly ministry. The reason is that it's recorded the beginning of the hostilities between the Jewish leaders and Jesus. And second, this chapter concludes the strongest arguments for the deity of Jesus Christ. He claims are unique, having a relationship with God as his Father. Our pastor is a reminder to us just how weak sign faith is. We talked about that, right? Sign faith is weaker than word faith. You see, Jesus used these signs to draw people to himself so they would hear what he's have to say. See, the Samaritans never saw a sign, but they embraced his words. Nicodemus saw the signs, but he had too many questions. I believe later he accepted Christ, later in Jesus' earthly ministry. See, John uses signs to draw people to himself, but they are inferior. It's like illegal drugs. Drugs have an effect on people, right? But the more you use it, the more you need to use it. But see, John uses signs to convince us and the readers who Jesus is. The Messiah, the God-man, the Son of God, the God in the flesh. See, while these signs that we talk about did produce some faith in some people, it was the words of God. Jesus does not use the angel troubled waters to heal the man. He healed the man with one word. Remember our Christmas series, The God Factor? Who's Jesus? Logos, the Word. Jesus is the Word, Logos. Just as Jesus used a word to create the world as we know it, he used a word to heal this man. He uses a word to draw us to himself and make us whole, and eventually make us holy. Finally, we see in our text a beautiful example of sovereign grace. Remember, grace is an unearned gift that is grace sovereignly given to us. Grace is not given to men because of who they are or what they've done. It's grace given to those who don't deserve it. If we are straightforward, none of us deserve grace. Even though I was 7 when I accepted Christ into my life, I still did not earn grace as a 7-year-old. I had a hard issue with cookies and milk. But seriously, God drew me to himself at an early age. Some of you are in the same boat. God drew you to himself at an early age. And some of you were drawn to himself at an older age with more physical and mental scars. But God can still use that to glorify himself. Jesus heals the man knowing full well this man would never accept him as Savior. That's amazing to me. But because of his love, he still showed him grace. See, Jesus doesn't just serve to save, meaning he does not just serve those who will be saved. There's a book I read years ago. I still have it on my library shelf called Unchristian. It's by a group of people that do questionnaires. And basically, it's interviews of those people who are on a faith journey. Some are Christians, some are not. And there is one story I read, and it still breaks my heart thinking about it, is that in New York City, a guy was interviewed and went, yeah, I knew this guy. He kept asking me to go to church with him, and I finally told him I'm really not interested. I thought he was my friend, and then he stopped contacting me. The guy wasn't about making a relationship with this guy. He wanted another spiritual notch in his belt. But just like that story of the New York pastor who graciously did the funeral for the homosexual man, read those passages, some of those men may have turned from their sinful ways, some didn't. It wasn't about making sure those men knew they were sinners. It was about those men knowing that God loved them. See, our job is to love. That's it. Our job is to show people who we are in Christ. I have written here, said, we like Jesus serve out of the depths of the love God is giving us for others, regardless of whether that love is reciprocated or rewarded by those whom we serve. We show people who we are. Some of you, I'm one of those guys, I go out of my way to let people know who I am. Some of you, when I first came, I know Gabriel did, I poke fun with Gabriel sometimes because he's in his 20s, a college student. And some of you went, oh, you're a pastor. You've been to Bible college. You're up there behind the pulpit. You must be squeaky clean. I'm one of you. I'm a special needs kid in elementary school who stutters, who can barely read. I tell people all the time, I'm bilingual, English and American, and neither one of them fluently. And I'm a donkey that God uses because I'm an empty glove and the Holy Spirit fills. When we think too much of ourselves, we need to build a bridge and get over ourselves. Because whatever good that happens in our lives, or what we're able to do, is because of what God is doing through us. Whatever screw-ups we do, and what are things that don't go wrong, that's when we take our eyes off of God and put it on ourselves. Remember what happened to Peter? He walked on the water, right? He was good as long as he had his eyes on Jesus. But when he took his eyes off of Jesus and looked at his circumstances, what happened? He sank. Our job is to keep our eyes on the one who calls us and follow his drumbeat. Those who served in the military, I say thank you for that. But I remember when Teresa and I first got married, she served 6 years as an Army officer, and we would go on walks. And the only cadence I know is the Rubber Ducky one from Sesame Street, but we use it to get in sync. Rubber Ducky, you're the one who makes bath times lots of fun. And basically you start on your right and you keep going. And there's so many cadences because you're trying to get 100 to 300 guys all lined up and all marching the same. Right, left, right, left. If you have one guy doing left, right, it throws everyone off. And that's how some of us are. That's why the old armies had the drum guy. It wasn't about keeping beat. It's about doing signals and about keeping people together. And we need to keep our eyes on the one who is the God of the universe. Because what's happening is that we're doing this. It's not too bad, but God is doing this. Sounds kind of weird, right? Some of us need to stop, wait, get on the same beat of God in your life, the same beat of what God is doing at Crosslife Church. God is working here. Even with Rick going through his stuff, I tell you guys all the time, I've told Rick, this is my lane. My lane is to encourage and challenge you each Sunday. My spiritual giftedness of admin, I can see things that need to be worked on, but that's not my gig right now. My gig is to encourage and challenge you. And when God restores Rick behind this pulpit, and he keeps his eyes on the one and the things that you guys want to see, and God is working, he will make it happen. Not Rick, not you. God will make it happen. See, Jesus had the power over time. God is going to restore Rick, Lord willing, to the eyes of faith behind his pulpit September, October-ish, because he has to be in isolation for 6 months after Wednesday. But the sign is not about the man who was healed, but about the man who did the healing. Your life is not about you. It is about the man who saves you. It's about the man who restores you. It's about the man who is able to make you holy, Holy, not WHOLE. Think about it. Let us pray.